I'm Fred Jenkins. I'm the Associate Dean of Libraries at UD, and I also teach Latin and Greek for the Religious Studies Department. The actual Egyptian name is the Book of Going Forth by Day. And what these books and related texts are, the earlier pyramid texts from the Old Kingdom, the coffin texts from the Middle Kingdom, are guidebooks for people who have died. People have always been very concerned about what will happen next. And the Egyptians created this elaborate view of the afterlife where life goes on pretty much as it does in our world. There's agriculture, people eat and drink, except now you're in a different world and the gods are there. This was a guidebook on how to get there and how to have a good afterlife. So after you had died, the Egyptians would, of course, go through this elaborate mummification process because it was important the physical body be preserved. And it needed to be entombed safely with appropriate offerings to support you in the afterlife. So this book would give you guidance on the various challenges you meet on your way to the afterlife. You would meet different kinds of dangerous critters, serpents, demons, and this would help you get through all of these. And one of the things that's very prominent in the Book of the Dead is you get to the judgment. So we have this idea in the West about the Last Judgment from the Judeo-Christian version. It's kind of different in the Egyptian version. There's a jackal-headed god Anubis who has a big scale. And he puts your heart on one side and there's an ostrich feather on the other. And if your heart is heavier than the feather, then there's a demon waiting in the wings to come and devour you. If your heart is lighter, then Thoth enters your name on the register and you get to go with Osiris and have a happy afterlife. So the Books of the Dead are largely a New Kingdom phenomenon. They start roughly around the 15th century BC. And they continue down into the Roman era, sometime 1st BC, 1st AD. The particular text that we'll have is a late example. It's probably from the 1st century BC. And it's a fairly generous selection of the Book of the Dead. There is no formal single text. You think of a text like this, it would have to be correct and complete in every tomb. There are roughly 200 chapters, and there's no one Book of the Dead that has all of them. And what's really interesting about this text is it has one unique feature that is found on no other text, and that is a collection of about 75 amulets, little magical symbols, on the back of one sheet. We have not found that on any other published Book of the Dead. The interesting thing, obviously, if you were royalty, you would have a very fancy book written by someone who could draw very precise, elegant characters. But there were also off-the-rack versions of Book of the Dead. So less well-off people would go and buy a prepared copy, usually a shorter one, not as many chapters. And these were all personalized, so your name would appear in various places in connection with Osiris. That was part of the magic. But they would be blank in the off-the-rack copies. So the scribe would then write in the name of whoever purchased it. And we even have one text where it's written in whoever. I think one thing that's really interesting about it is the different ways all of our cultures have looked at and tried to deal with death. And this is not the only culture that has a handbook on what happens. And you think of the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which again is a guide to the experiences that people will have and how to deal with them in the bardos, the intermediate states. And just think about the ways people approach death and try to work out a successful way to transition